Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. So today's topic of the video is going to be whether or not there can be a Republican wave come 2018. So the short answer obviously would be yes. There is always a possibility the incumbent party could possibly gain seats in the midterm elections. However, it is not that likely. When we look at the data we have now, it does not look good for Republicans whatsoever, especially since we look at historical data like 2014 midterm years or 2010 or even 2006, the last time there was a Democratic wave year. It does not look good for Republicans at all. Like 0%. Right now, the Democrats lead by 7.8%, and a lot of people like to point out, and they say things like, I don't give the Republicans enough credit, I don't like to point out data that doesn't necessarily benefit the Democrats. However, I can't find any true data that shows the Republicans ahead nationwide. Yes, there are statewide polls. I have consistently acknowledged those. Sometimes only in one state have I ever gone against the way that the polls are showing, and that is the state of Florida, and I explain my reasoning there. But when it comes down to it, right now, the Democrats are ahead nationwide. You cannot deny that. To say that there is somehow going to be an 8% difference between the polls and the 2018 midterms that would somehow put the Republicans in the majority nationwide does not make any sense. Logically speaking, these polls aren't going to be 100% inaccurate. The margins probably aren't going to be 100% correct, but just because a couple polls were wrong in 2016 does not discredit every single poll, and I think that's the problem when it comes down to analyzing data. A lot of people like to ignore data that doesn't benefit them and then cling on to data that does benefit them. If you're going to say that the president has a 49% approval rating, now 48% if you look at the recent poll by Rasmussen, the Democrats are ahead 7% nationwide. You cannot take one and discard the other just because you do not agree with it. And that is overall the whole problem with a lot of people saying that I don't like to point out data, because there is no real data to point out. If you want me to make up numbers, sure, but I'm not going to do that. I take the data there, I analyze it, and typically it benefits the Democrats, mainly because this is a Democratic wave year. This is not 2010. This is not 2014. This is not a time where we have an incumbent Democratic Party president, but we have an incumbent Republican. To completely deny history and say that somehow this year is going to be different and all the data is 100% wrong and your intuition against every single pundit is somehow correct. And I know I'm going to see a comment of people saying, oh, well, in 2016, the media was wrong. The media wasn't 100% wrong. Yes, they did project a Hillary Clinton victory, but the question stands, who didn't, number one. And number two, when it came down to polling, the popular vote polling was correct, and only 4 states were incorrect, and 1 state was actually projected to go to Trump, but what didn't actually end up going into the Trump column, and that was the state of Nevada. Clinton would have won the election based off polling, but by 6 electoral votes, so it was not a landslide margin that a lot of people like to point out. Let's go ahead and take a look at the generic ballot poll. It was on your screen from 538, which shows a 7.8% lead, but on Real Clear Politics, they show a 6.8% lead. So since I made the poll that said Democrats were down, they've pretty much shot right back up. They very much, I mean, they did very well. I mean, in just a span of a couple days, they shot up to a 6.8% lead from a 4.4% lead. And if we compare it to other elections, let's go ahead and take a look at 2014, the last time there was a Republican wave year besides a presidential year. The Republicans led by 2.4% nationwide and finished off with a 5.7% lead. So I guess you could say that the Republicans did better than polling, but that's not that doesn't show them overcoming that margin by 7%. Well, let's go ahead and look at 2010, the first time in the year 2000s where there was actually a true Republican wave year, and the Republicans led by 9.4% and actually finished off with 6.8%. So I guess you could say that the Republicans underperformed here. So again, maybe they did better in 2014 than polling suggested, but also underperformed in the 2010 generic ballot. And let's go ahead and take a look at 2006, the last time there was a Democratic wave year. The Democrats led in every single poll. Whenever there's a Republican wave year, the Democrats take an early lead. There was not a single time in any of the polling numbers where the Republicans led. And I mean 0. There was not a single time where the Republicans led in opinion polling whatsoever. And that is almost exactly what we were seeing here for the 2018 generic congressional vote. If we look at the polling numbers, it's consistently Democratic, maybe a Republican once. And that's just a completely, different type polling, whatever. The most we'll see is a tie. So right now we're seeing exactly what we saw in 2006. So history is starting to repeat itself, especially with an unpopular incumbent president, with the opposition party doing very well in terms of enthusiasm. The only thing different from 2006 was the economy wasn't 100% bad. In fact, it is actually doing very well in terms of the economy. But other than that, we're seeing the exact same warning signs that the GOP saw in 2006 and the same ones that the Democrats saw in 2010 and 2014. Let's go ahead and take a look at the, the 2018 House map by Real Clear Politics. It shows a number of close races, likely, leaning, and safe races for the GOP. Well, in the toss-up column, we have 40 Republican seats and 2 Democratic seats, a number of Republican seats in the leaning GOP seat, and a couple in the likely. And as for the likely and leaning Democratic, a couple Democratic seats, but actually we have 7 Republican seats in leaning or worse for the GOP. Around the same what we saw in 2010. The last time there was a true wave year in the House of Representatives was 2010, when the Republicans picked up 63 seats nationwide. Look at that toss-up column. Okay, 2 Republican seats. In 2018, we see 2 Democratic seats. In the toss-up column, 40 Republican seats. Here, we see a number of Democratic seats. There's an exact number, but a number of Democratic seats. Actually, in the leaning GOP column, there were 40 Democratic seats. So the GOP was at a much better standpoint. I'm not saying the Democrats are going to gain 63 seats and somehow come out with a majority like they did before with 255 seats and 178 for the Republicans. However, history does look very good for the Democrats in terms of the House of Representatives. But we can also take a look at the tracking Trump from the Morning Consult and look at the states where a lot of people like to say that a Republican wave is possible. However, in Wisconsin, Trump has a negative 15% approval rating. In Michigan, it is negative 11. Pennsylvania, negative 7. In Iowa, negative 6. In Minnesota, negative 14. In Ohio, negative 1. Okay, and a number of these key swing states, especially in the Senate elections, Donald Trump is not doing phenomenal. So a lot of people like to point out, Ohio and Iowa, even though Iowa doesn't have a Senate race, they like to use this for the gubernatorial predictions. I mean, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania all went to Trump in 2016. And I've seen a number of predictions, surprisingly, that show the Democrats losing here, and some by very large margins. That does not make sense whatsoever. In Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the Democratic candidates are leading. And in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, they lead by over 10%. So these candidates aren't necessarily in dangerous waters compared to other Democrats like in Missouri and North Dakota and Montana, and like Republicans in Arizona or Nevada or Tennessee. So I get it. The argument works in a couple of these states, but to see the Rust Belt and states like Iowa and the gubernatorial map to be solidly Republican or likely Republican does not make sense whatsoever, especially in the case of the Senate. The approval rating of the president has gone down here drastically. The areas where the Democrats think that they might lose in, maybe Florida, or Missouri, or Indiana, or North Dakota. However, the Democrats do have a pretty good standing in states like Montana, or actually even Missouri at this point in time, in Arizona, in Tennessee, in Nevada, some of these states with the Republican incumbents. So when we look at the Senate map, well, if the GOP isn't doing good in the House map, what data shows good news for the GOP in the Senate? Well, the Senate does have a number of states, 10 states to be exact, where Trump won in 2016, but he's disapproved in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not really 6, but I guess you could count Utah, but that one isn't really, it's not that, obviously it's not too contested considering Utah's already a safe red state, but I guess around 5 states right now Trump is negatively approved of. And also the approval rating of the incumbent senators here, only 2 of the senators underperform what Donald Trump is doing in this state. In Indiana, Joe Donnelly has a higher approval rating than Donald Trump, which is very, very interesting. To see an incumbent Democrat in a Republican state with a higher approval rating than a Republican president, it's very interesting. Same case down in Florida and a couple of other states, but obviously Trump is highly approved of in a couple of these states where the Democrats think they could have a pickup in, like in Tennessee or in Texas, where Donald Trump has a positive approval rating of higher than 5%, which means that these states, based off the approval, could be more than a leaning seat. However, when it comes down to it, the data is also suggesting that these races will get a lot closer. So the Senate doesn't look horrible for the GOP. I mean, they have a number of possibilities for pickups, but it doesn't look too good for them either. They don't have a shot in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania at this point in time, not Ohio, possibly not even West Virginia, possibly not even Montana. North Dakota and Indiana and Florida seem a little bit closer to their reach than a couple other of these states, and it's pretty surprising. But also when we look at the gubernatorial map, considering that there are a number of races up, 36 to be exact, in this election year. There are going to be a number of states that are going to reflect with the president. I mean, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire all have Republican incumbents. Those races are probably going to get just a little bit closer than they could have been if there was a Hillary Clinton presidency, only because Donald Trump is the Republican incumbent, but they are still expected to win. So the GOP does phenomenal on the gubernatorial map. The governor's map, obviously, that's the same thing. But in the Senate map, the GOP is doing pretty well, but they could also be doing much better, and the Democrats right now are pushing back, and it looks like the GOP possibly could lose seats in the United States Senate. And the whole point of this video was to say, could there be a Republican wave? Well, in the House, it doesn't look too likely, but obviously these districts are still in the toss-up column, but they have Republican incumbents, which means that these races aren't already thrown into the Democratic column. It is very likely, not very likely, but it is likely that Republicans do win here. They're around a 50-50 chance in a number of these districts, and even though that may not look good for the GOP right now, there are still 42 seats yet to characterize. So the Democrats right now are only expected to gain a total of 5 seats for right now, based off the map. Actually, sorry, I guess you could say, since they would be gaining 7 here, but then losing 1, it's just it's pretty different than what you might expect, but the Republicans and the Democrats are a pretty good and even standpoint in terms of leaning likely and safe states combined, 199 to 194. There's still 42 seats. Let's say the GOP wins all of them. The GOP would have a majority still. So I'm not saying a Republican wave in the House is completely impossible. It definitely isn't in the Senate, and it looks like it could actually happen in the governor's map. Obviously, the Democrats will make pickups because this is their wave year. However, it is possible for the Republicans to turn that into just a little bit of a ripple in terms of the NGA, because there are a number of races in key Democratic areas where Democrats would be relying on for numbers, and they won't be winning there at all. So overall, the Democrats are doing very well nationwide. We're seeing very similar characteristics, and the reason why I don't there isn't really any data for me to possibly point out. I mean, sure, Marsha Blackburn leads by 4% in a new poll, but that doesn't mean I have to disregard every other poll and say that those are 100% wrong just because a new poll comes out. And then when a new poll comes out saying Bredesen wins, a lot of people like to say, oh, you can't acknowledge that because the primaries are over. And, there's a whole different type of argument. So right now, the only reason why I don't typically acknowledge why there's a possibility of Republican wave year, because it isn't too possible at this point in time. The Republicans possibly can do damage control and retain the majority very narrowly, but it's pretty much a given at this point in the time that the Democrats will gain seats in the House and the governor mansion area. And then in terms of the Senate, it is possible for the Republicans to actually gain seats here, but other than that, if they're not winning in the House, the Senate, they already have the majority, and they have the majority in the House. They would still be losing one part of Congress. That would be very vital for things passing in this administration. So overall, that sums up everything I wanted to say. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.